right, our elementary kiddos can be dismissed. Back to Capstone kids. You can start turning to Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. And just a side note, our staff got together this last week and had a planning retreat, and we are super excited for 2025. I hope you're starting to get excited. The Lord has big things in store, and as we've constantly thought and trusted, the best is yet to come. And so we're really looking forward to what God is doing and showing even today and growing us in so many ways. But just be ready and excited for what He has in store for us. But anyways, glad to be back and starting this new year. So happy New Year. You've probably heard that already from several folks. But as we're getting started in the new year, I'm excited to start a new series this morning. And I've entitled this series, The Jesus Way. And for the next several weeks, we're going to look at how Jesus did discipleship, right? And we're going to see mostly what Jesus said about discipleship in His own words. Now, as we're getting started with this and to start getting our heads around this idea, have you ever noticed something that might seem new but is actually old? There's a lot of examples of this in today's world. First of all, it's like the idea that grunge clothing is back. Anybody notice that? Right? Anybody glad we're kind of moving out of the skinny jeans era a little bit? Right? Not Wranglers are okay, but the other skinny jeans, right? Right? Grunge clothing is back. That's actually an old thing. There's not a ton of youth in here, but that's an old thing, not a new thing, right? If you didn't know that, right? Or here's one that I really like. Carhartt is now a style brand. Anybody notice that? Like Carhartt has been around forever. It's always been good workwear, but now it's kind of like the celebrities wear it. Or how about this one? Those Stanley cups. Right? Anybody got one? I've talked about this before, and when I talked about it the first time, I talked more about how popular they are, how in demand they are. But this morning, I want us to think about what they really are, right? They're super popular today. Everybody's getting one. It was about this time last year, there was that mad dash for the pink one at Target or something like that, right? But here's the news flash. Stanley is a really old brand. Anybody else know that? Right? If any of us have grown up working or in the woods or something, you know that it's an old brand, right? How many dads or grandpas everywhere have had a Stanley that's older than I am, right? And think of what that thing usually looks like it's beat up, and it probably has some stickers, maybe of some fishing brand or some hardware store, or something like stickers on it, right? And it's seen many job sites, and it's held thousands and thousands of gallons of coffee. In fact, my first sip of black coffee at 4 years old, okay, I don't know how old I was, I can't remember, but my first sips of black coffee came from the lid of a Stanley thermos, right? I was hooked ever since. Right? It's this idea of a double-walled vacuum bottle. In fact, they were introduced in 1913, over 100 years ago. And this double-walled vacuum has caught on. In fact, every other hot liquid cup we have is just a copycat. In fact, you could go today and search on Amazon for a coffee mug or vacuum mug, and you will find over 30,000 options. And they come from 40 brands. But it's interesting coming back to that. Guess what the best seller is today? The Stanley, right? See, Stanley seems new, or a lot of people think it's something new on the scene, but it's actually a very old thing. Now, here's my point in this, right? The idea that something that seems new can actually be something that's been around for a long time. And that's actually the case with discipleship, right? In fact, what we're going to look at is the idea and method of discipleship of Jesus has been around from the beginning of the church. And as I started to look at this, in my research, I found thousands of blogs and hundreds of videos. And the thing is, as I started to look at this with so many hot takes on the subject, with so many people that think they have a fresh idea or a new idea on discipleship, right? This is actually something that's been around forever. And it takes some time to kind of filter through all of the thoughts and definitions, but what I've settled on is coming back to this idea that Jesus' way of discipleship is the best way of discipleship. So, as we're getting started, I want to be honest for just a moment in thinking about this series. I don't know if you think of me as your pastor in this way, but Jesus is in fact still discipling my heart, right? No one is beyond discipleship. And in my leading of our church and the things that we're doing, God is growing me. I'm learning on the fly. I'm moving forward. No one is beyond that. No one is beyond being discipled, right? And it's in this frame of mind that in some ways Christ recently has kind of given me a new heart, a renewed heart for discipleship, a renewed passion for leading our church in this area, kind of the next step of where we're going in things. Not that we haven't had discipleship, not that it hasn't been important, but he's saying now that you're growing like you are, here's where we're going next in this. Right? So this series is going to be a way to kind of continue to get our heads around discipleship. Now, I know I've preached about it before. In fact, I can go back to my notes and find sermons from about 2 years ago where I've preached about this before. But I want us to take this unique look and see how Jesus showed us to do it. Right? It's who we've been, but more importantly, it will be what takes us into the future. So here's where we're going with this series. The series theme, it's the idea that Jesus' way of discipleship is the best. And what we're going to look at is that Jesus actually had a method. Because sometimes we can look at Jesus and be like, no, he just was blown in the wind. He just went by the seat of his pants and whatever happened. No, Jesus actually had a method. Jesus had a way of doing it, and that's what I'm hoping we will see. See, if the encounters of Jesus are inspired, right? Think of like the woman at the well or the encounter with the disciples, right? If we think those things are inspired, then we have to think that Jesus' method of making disciples is also inspired. So, by knowing what a disciple is, right? Here's the bottom line. I want all of us to be able to do two things when we're done with this series. I want you to be able to do two things when we get through, not just today, but through the next several weeks looking at discipleship. Number one, I want you to be able to look at your own life and see just where you are in your discipleship pathway. I want you to look at what you're going through, where you're at, your involvement here, all the things going on, and be able to see where you are at in your discipleship pathway, right? That means we have to be honest and ready to take the next step, because to take that self-assessment means that we're doing it for a reason, that we want to grow in our discipleship. But number two, and this is really important about his method, I want us to identify where other people are at in their journey and begin to figure out how to help them be discipled as well. Right? That's what we're going to see in Jesus. So, as we are starting with this, I know this is a lot of introduction, but here's how we will define a disciple. We're going to build this for the next several weeks. But it comes from the Greek word mathetes, and it means student, learner, follower. A disciple is someone who is following Jesus to be developed by him to multiply his mission, to expand on his mission. And this morning, where we're going to start is the idea that you need discipleship, because being a Christian is being a disciple. Being a Christian is being a disciple. So that's what we're going to see this morning. And I want to be clear, this isn't just something extra that we sometimes engage, but we always engage with. So with that, we can start looking at Matthew chapter 4. And we're going to start to see how Jesus speaks on his method of discipleship. Right? And what we're going to see is where he calls the first disciple. So Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18. This is what Matthew records for us this morning. He says, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And then really where we're going to focus on, verse 19. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. I love their nickname. Sons of Thunder is what they're called, right? He went and saw these two other brothers. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets, and Jesus called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. That is Jesus. So just to catch us up to speed a little bit here, right? Jesus is beginning his public ministry. This is right at the beginning of him kind of becoming public with what he's going to teach and lead. So if you kind of glance around in the surrounding chapters here, he's been baptized, he's been tested in the wilderness, he's started to preach in this neck of the woods, right? He even moved from Nazareth, right? Remember the Christmas story, to Capernaum where he is now. And he has this encounter with these men, right? These brothers, Peter and Andrew and James and John, right? Now, I don't know if you were like me, but I really like these fishermen. I like this scene right here. I don't know if it's because I'm a fisherman myself or just because they're ordinary people like the rest of us, right? But this calling from Jesus is so powerful. Like imagine if you were going about your business on the Sea of Galilee and Jesus walks up and says, hey, I want you to follow me. That's wild to think about, right? But just look at the words of Jesus in that verse 19. The key word as we're getting started, he says, come follow me. I've been very particular about how we talk about being a believer at Capstone. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when I talk about it, I don't just talk about believing, I talk about following. The question to ask is, are you a follower of Jesus? Right? But what we see here encapsulates what it means to become a disciple, and we have to be careful to not think that this was just some special category of Christian that we will never obtain. Like somehow this call was for these guys that became the 12 disciples, and it's not to us. In fact, it is a call to us. Just to prove my point, it's interesting when we start to look at the New Testament, how many times do you think the term Christian shows up? Thousands? A bunch? The term Christian in the New Testament shows up 3 times. Only 3. But do you know how many times the word disciple shows up in the New Testament? Primarily in the Gospels. It shows up 269 times. See what's starting to kind of take shape here? Right? Jesus is beginning to show us that true faith happens through you and not just to you. That following him, that being a disciple is what we're called to be. Yes, we know the terminology Christian, but more importantly, to describe who we are and what we're supposed to be doing is this idea of being a disciple. So discipleship at its simplest distilled form is investing the truth of gospel in your life and then in the lives of others. That's what Jesus is starting here. And the whole purpose of Jesus' 3+ years of ministry was to raise up men and women who were just like him and who could do ministry the way he taught them to do it, right? This is where we are getting our theme from, the why we need to be disciples who actually make disciples. That is a Christian. Again, that happens 3 times in the New Testament. That is, anyone who follows Jesus is in fact, by default, a disciple. You can't separate the two. You can't have one without the other. Right? It's like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What happens when you smack those 2 sides of bread together? Are you getting them apart again? I mean, you can try, but you're going to have a little jelly on the peanut butter. You're going to have a little peanut butter in the jelly. It's meant to be together. Right? You can't separate the two. Being a Christian, following Jesus, and being his disciple. But to not just leave it right there, we have to look at Jesus' own words here to see why we need discipleship. That's really what I want our hearts to understand. We're answering the why this morning. So let's focus on that verse 19 again, just the first little part. He says, come follow me, right? I'm a Bible nerd, and I guess it's partly my job, but I love to look up the original language here, right? It's in Greek, and if you look at the Greek, this is actually what's called an imperative. If you want to know what an imperative is, it's a command. So when Jesus says, come follow me, he didn't just saunter on up and said, hey, Andrew and Peter, you guys want to do this? No, he says, he looked him in the eyes, he said, come follow me, as a command. He commanded them, right? Same with James and John. So it's in this statement that we see the first thing we need to see from this passage. The first why. We need discipleship because Jesus commands it, right? Jesus commands it. And these men responded well. I love how this is playing out. Their decision was fairly well reasoned. Now, be careful how we sometimes hear this, or someone else has maybe preached it. Sometimes people are like, oh, they were just haphazard and they decided to follow Jesus. There's more to the story there, right? It's fairly well reasoned. It takes big faith, don't get me wrong, right? But they responded well. Even Jesus choosing these men of any men, right? He could have gone to anybody, was intentional. And I know they responded well, that it wasn't just haphazard, because in John 1, it actually tells us that these brothers had seen Jesus before. They had actually seen some of the other things that he had done, even in this early stage of his ministry. Andrew already knew how to be a disciple because he also had previously been a disciple of John the Baptist. So it was already kind of simmering in their hearts. But I love what we see. They didn't waffle for a moment. I think if it were me in that boat preparing nets that morning, I would have been like, I'm not so sure about this. Right? Leave fishing behind? No, their decision was decisively obedient, and their commitment was complete. See, the biggest thing for us to understand when Christ gives us a command is that you and I, can know what Jesus desires of us. I love that about his commands. He's clear on what we need to do. He was clear to these men, these fishermen that he called for the first time. See, the thing is, when Jesus comes to us with a command, it's not like the menu issues we run into. Anybody have that issue? Like you go to order and you just can't make up your mind? Anybody waffle when you go to the restaurant or the fast food and you're in the drive-thru and you're like, what do I need to get? I can't make up my mind. Do I want the burger or the chicken sandwich? Right? I think there's menu paralysis for some of us. See, I love when Jesus gives a command because we don't have menu paralysis. Jesus doesn't come to us and say, hey, here's your options, try a few of these. No, he said, this is what I want you to do. We're not second guessing. There's not really any room to waffle. Now, again, our hearts might struggle with it and the faith might be difficult, and that's where the waffling is going to come in, but he's pretty clear. There aren't a menu of choices. Come follow me. And here's the truth. Following is what a disciple does. We don't have to guess what Jesus wants for us. We don't have to guess what Jesus wants for other people, right? He doesn't leave us guessing. Even here, Jesus uses terms that these fishermen would get. They would understand what it meant to leave their nets and follow him, right? And again, what may have seemed hasty or probably aloof or out of nowhere was actually probably calculated, right? Jesus came to him. Imagine, he's like, you guys love fishing. Follow me. Love me more than anything, right? Love me more than fishing. That's what he was saying. You're pretty good at that. You want to use that same work ethic and passion and devotion to change people's lives? He's saying, come follow me. See, we need discipleship because Jesus was pretty clear that it's what he wants from us. But let's see the next part. Look at verse 19 again. We're really going to camp out in this verse this morning. So much to pull apart here. I might even preach on it next week because there's so much here. Verse 19 again. And then he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. So he's given them a pretty tall order to leave life and home and livelihood, right? To forsake the things that they were used to. And then he was calling them to a completely new school of thought. In fact, that part of the book hadn't been written yet, right? But a crucial truth of Christ's method is hidden right there in those words. And frankly, it's a powerful truth that we all need anytime God calls us to something. So the second thing we see this morning is right here. We need discipleship because Jesus empowers it. Did you catch that? Right? He says, follow me. Here's your tall order. And who will make you fishers of men? I will make you fishers of men. Right? He was going to empower what he was calling these men to. See, these fishermen weren't disciples yet, but Jesus would make them into that very thing. This is crucial when it's paired with the first part, right? Jesus won't call or command us to something without empowering us to do it. Right? Isn't that a good thought? Right? Sometimes we are paralyzed and we're like, I don't know, we get that menu paralysis because we're not sure how it's going to happen and like, how is this actually going to be something he turns me into? How can I become a disciple? I don't know the basics of like the faith. How God will empower us. He won't call us to it. Christ will empower us. He won't call us to it without empowering us. He won't leave us hanging. Right? I think about it in this way. It's interesting if you've ever done grocery pickup. Anybody a firm believer in that? I'm almost ardently against it. I'm not a fan of it. But my wife loves it. Why? Usually when I go to the grocery store, it's me by myself, right? Who's with her when she usually goes to the grocery store, right? She's got 3 kiddos she has to tow along, and it makes the trip twice as long. So my wife is a huge believer in grocery pickup. I am not. And you know why I'm not a believer? It's because you're kind of like giving authority to those people to get your groceries for you. Right? I think of one time in particular, we like to put serranos instead of jalapenos in our salsa, and we wanted a few serranos, like 2 or 3, like our normal, depending on the heat level. Well, they did a substitution. Before we knew it, we had a whole pack of 30 serranos, right? I had to make serrano poppers, like jalapeno. I had to make something with them. But that authority, that's just kind of handed over. But the struggle is, like, you're just kind of leaving them hanging. They're now trying to decide or read your mind on what you want. So I prefer to go in there and get some now. I get why my wife's doing it. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but that's the reason I don't like it, is because you're kind of leaving it hanging out there. You're just kind of putting the authority on somebody else or letting them guess like what bananas to pick for you. I don't know, maybe it's a control thing I need to confess to the Lord, but I like to pick my own bananas. I don't want to leave anybody hanging, right? But when Jesus calls the disciples here, he doesn't say, hey, here's the task I have before you. Now figure it out somehow. He doesn't leave them hanging. He empowers them. Right? Jesus even gives us his authority. Matthew 28, in the Great Commission, he says, all authority has been given to me, and now I'm giving it to you. I'm empowering you. Right? That's powerful. So we cannot say, I can't or I won't, because we are not powerless. We have the power of Christ in us. If our life is given to him, if we are surrendered to him, we have him working in us. So we can't squander his calling and his command in that way, because he's seeking to empower us to be disciples that make disciples. But there's more here. Look at that verse 19 again. It says, and he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Now, again, there are some contextual clues in this that we have to dig for, but he uses such a powerful analogy. Remember, again, he's like, you're fishermen. Why don't you use your talent to change other people's lives, right? Just in those words, he was helping them understand his calling on their lives. But there's even more to this. By the whole account, right, we see these men by the seashore, and he comes and calls them, right? These 4 men in 2 separate scenarios were working at the family business, an opportunity that meant support for their whole family, right? And Peter and Andrew were from Bethsaida, right? This is an interesting little fact in here, right? They were from Bethsaida, so they too had moved to Capernaum, a few miles away, and they had probably done so because they thought there was more lucrative fishing opportunities there. Simply put, there was better fishing in Capernaum than where they were from, and they thought they might make more money, right? So that's why they went there, right? So in other words, whether they were catching fish or not, these first disciples, these first men were pursuing both well-being and fulfillment through their fishing exploits. So this is my opinion, right? But I think this plays into the why we must desire discipleship. See, Peter and Andrew, James, and even John were all seeking fulfillment in full nets and fuller bank accounts, but they were still left completely unsatisfied. Right? When Jesus came to encounter them, when he came to call them, Jesus knew in their hearts that the fishing wasn't cutting it. Not just on the fact that they needed more of a living, it wasn't cutting it because they were unsatisfied. It doesn't say how many fish. We know other scenes of this talks about lack thereof at times. We don't know how many fish they had this morning per se, but we know that they weren't fulfilled in this simple worldly thing. So when Jesus came calling, they found our next truth this morning. See, we need discipleship because it is the key to a fulfilled life, right? See, the fullest life is a life given to Jesus for Jesus, a life given to following him, right? Let me just give you the secret as you're entering into the new year. Jesus and following him and being discipled by him isn't just some add-on to things. If your life is unfulfilled, it's probably because you're not letting Christ disciple your heart. You're not walking with him. You're not seeking him like you should. The key to any fulfillment, it's not like all these other things like finally paying off my house or buying the new truck or getting a new job and all the things that we desire and then Jesus. No, it's Jesus first, right? That's what Jesus knew that these young men needed, right? See, I want to be really clear right here. Right? We can't expect to experience the blessings of Jesus and divorce ourselves from the missional method he was using to change the world. Right? We can't separate ourselves from what Jesus was attempting to accomplish. In fact, Jesus gave us a whole sermon on it. You can glance over in my Bible. I love it's red on the next page. He gives us a whole sermon of 2.5 chapters of what he was trying to accomplish, of what his methods were. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And over again, he talks about how he is the source of all joy. In fact, John 10:10, I have come that you may have life and that you may have it to the full. I love that scene because not only is he talking about full and a joy-filled life, he's also saying there's a thief out there. And that thief will steal that joy. If we're not following him, a thief's going to come in, or thieves, multiple, and steal our joy. And what is it? By just thinking about him? By making a decision one time? No, I think it's by following him like this says, right? He is no thief, but he is the shepherd that our hearts and lives so desperately need. So we have only two options with things that lead to better, right? Usually we think about it as far as healthy things this time of year, right? Healthy living, right? But you have two options: to pursue those things and accomplish some of what it does for us to actually live better, or to ignore those things and to carry on our life in a diminished or more difficult way and kind of be left behind. What I'm saying is right here in Matthew chapter 4, we have a living and vibrant example of how Jesus is the key to life today and eternity future. Jesus says so himself. And being a disciple, being his disciple, brings us back moment by moment into that joy. And it takes the other things we strive for that actually can be good and makes them even better. That's what these fishermen show us right here. But it's right here that I need to start to bring this home. And there's finally one last little part I want us to grasp this morning, right? We're just starting to open the whole scene here and see where we're going. But notice that passage, or that verse 19 one more time. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. See, Jesus' command automatically pushed the disciples towards other people. I love how fully orbed this command from Jesus is. His whole method laid out right here. Right? In a nutshell, give your all to me, let me grow you and make you into the disciple you need to be, and then I will use what I do in you to go help do it in others, to empower others to do the same. It automatically pushes them that way. So for us, just simply as we're starting, people so desperately need a relationship with Christ. Again, not just a decision, but a relationship with Him, right? We're going to really open this up in the weeks to come, but the outcome of being discipled must be that we pull others in around us. Disciples make disciples. And following Jesus gives the idea of being completely shaped by others. Example, right? By His example, and then Him using us to help shape others, to put your footsteps in the steps of another. Again, that's where Jesus' whole life was going. Just think about it. To pour His whole life out for us. For somebody else, right? So we must invest what we know to be so good in others. Right? People around us are hungry for it. I can't help but think about my kiddos, right? You wake up every morning, guess what? They're hungry. Anybody ever realize that about kids? First thing they do, they want food, right? Very first thing, they're starving, apparently. They haven't eaten since last week, but it was just last night, and they didn't eat their dinner that well anyways, and that's probably why they're starving. But they wake up and they roll you out of bed, and you try to get your coffee started, and you're ready to start feeding them. And here's the thing: if I was a dad that didn't feed my kiddos, like forgot or refused or waited till lunchtime, some of you are like, I know I've forgotten till lunchtime before, right? But if I didn't feed my kids, I would be a bad father, right? To be a good father, to see them grow, to keep them healthy, I've got to feed them. Someday they're going to feed themselves. Thank the Lord, right? Someday they're going to pay for the groceries. But right now, while they're young, while they're growing, it is my job to invest in them in that way. They are small, starving disciples, apparently. It's my job to help them grow. It's an 18-year investment or more. Some of you are like, many more, right? And a lot of work at first. But again, someday they will be grown. But here's the truth about feeding my kiddos. It's so totally worth it, right? See, the point is we have to help other people find what we know that they are hungry for. We have to disciple them and help them come to the feet of Jesus. Not that it's anything we can give them, but that they can feast on the goodness of who He is and find their fulfillment in Him. See, other people are hungry for discipleship, to find their all in Christ Jesus. So here's where I want to end this morning. I want to answer again the why we need this. See, I want me to live our lives to the fullest calling in Christ. To experience a sold-out, joy-inducing, Christ-glorifying life, right? And the key to a fulfilled life is being like Jesus. And we can actually do that because we are empowered by Him. See, I want me to be more like Jesus. And the best part of all of this is He shows us how to do that. The fullest life is a life given to Him for His glory, a life given to following Him. So my prayer is that you and I, for the next several weeks, will see the Jesus way. So with that, I want to go to a point of response. If you would, just bow your head and close your eyes. If everybody would just bow their head and close their eyes. I want to encourage you to think about how the Lord may be speaking to your heart this morning. And I want to start simply as I really do most Sundays. As we begin to respond this morning, I want you to, right there as you're sitting there, think about your own heart and maybe the path and the spot you're on. But this whole thing, right, if you came in this morning and you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this whole scene this morning starts by someone following Jesus. So this morning, I want to give you the opportunity, if you've never decided to do that, to start following Him for the first time. It's simple. I don't want to take long. And the biggest thing is I want to sit you down. I don't want to leave you hanging. I want to sit you down and walk you through, disciple you through what that means. But it has to start with the decision. So this morning, if you want to follow Him for the first time, if you want to surrender your life to Him for the first time, all I want you to do to respond is put your hand in the air. That's me, Pastor Caleb. I've never actually done that. And then I want to sit down and walk you through it. We won't take long. If that's you, just put your hand in the air. thanks. Again, without anybody looking around, I also want to encourage you as a fellow believer. You thought much about your own discipleship? Maybe where you're at on that pathway. Again, we're going to take some weeks to kind of open this up, and I'm hoping I can help you really discover exactly where you're at. But is your heart ready to consider the Jesus way of discipleship? The first thing we see in these disciples is a willingness, and then that radical obedience. So here's what I want to pray for you this morning. I just want to pray that your heart would be ready to be discipled, whatever that next step might look like for you. So I want to pray for you this week. If you're sitting there saying, Pastor Caleb, I haven't really considered my own pathway, my own spot in this. And you're saying, Pastor Caleb, would you just pray for me that I could begin to discover that as we walk through God's Word together on this subject? So if you want me to pray for you this weekend that way, just put your hand in the air in the same way. Say, lift me up, that I would be open to what God might be saying to my heart about my own discipleship. I just want to lift you up this week. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for your word and the way you speak to our hearts. And God, I pray we wouldn't take it lightly. The awesome opportunity that we have to open your word and to hear directly from you. So Lord, I pray you would just continue to speak. And God, I pray we would just come before you and be honest and open, even radically obedient, to be ready to say, Lord, I'm ready to follow you wherever you might be leading. Not, Lord, that we haven't started on this discipleship journey, but Lord, you want to take us to the next place. None of us are beyond being discipled. So God, I just pray you would guide our hearts. Continue to speak to us. Help us to know what you're ready to teach us and show us throughout this series. And we just thank you for your word this morning. Pray these things in your name. Amen.
Stand and worship.